So yeah, Emmett, if you would just text me questions as they come in, I have some notes from some different things that I've been looking at, and it's been there's a lot of information flying around, folks. My name's John Haller. I teach at Fellowship Bible Chapel. I'm a semi-retired trial lawyer. I've been traveling a lot this year, Scotland, California, Texas, Canada, speaking at some different conferences, Bible prophecy conferences. And I do a lot of interviews as well. So I'm trying to record this to our YouTube channel just to save me some time. And I don't know how well this is going to work. So you can get us, you can follow us if you want at Fellowship Bible Chapel on YouTube. And we're also on Rumble at Real FBC. And I think we're going to have more things at Rumble than YouTube at some point, because YouTube has a tendency to not like the topics that we talk about. So we try to cover a lot of things at Fellowship Bible Chapel that are relevant to Bible prophecy. There are different things that we're taught in the end times are going to be. Like, for example, when you look in 1 Timothy 4 and 2 and 3 and 2 Timothy 3 and 4, it talks about there'll be this rather bizarre stuff at the end times, the way people will, in the church, they'll depart from the faith, but in the secular world, they'll just lose the ability to reason. And we see a lot of that happening, particularly with this transgender movement that's become so popular over the past few years. It seems like it came about all of a sudden. But that's one of the things that I think we'll find that is true in Bible prophecy going forward, that things will seem to be happening more suddenly that are related to Bible prophecy or of the actual fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And I really do believe we live at this time. We're seeing things in the world that we've never seen before. And I'm not saying that Hemingway is a scripture, but Hemingway, I think it's in The Sun Also Rises, there are two characters that are talking. And the one character says to the other, "How did you end up going bankrupt anyway?" And the guy who went bankrupt says, "Well, I went bankrupt in two ways, gradually, then suddenly." And I think that's also the way we're going to see these things unfold in Bible prophecy over the next days, weeks, months, and years, that things are going to happen, what are happening now gradually, they're going to suddenly appear. So the things that we see happening today, and with regards, let's say, for example, the transgender movement, that just didn't happen overnight or happen in a vacuum. That stuff happened over a period of time, but then the big problems suddenly appeared. And that's in Jewish prophecy, and the Bible is a Jewish book. In Jewish prophecy, things are a pattern. And so we would expect that the pattern of things that were going on at the first coming of Christ will fit the pattern of things that are going on at the second coming of Christ. One of the things we know that happened at the first coming was that people missed it. But we also know that there were many, many prophecies, a lot of these prophecies that existed for a couple thousand years before Jesus came. They were fulfilled during his first coming. They related to his first coming, his virgin birth, and those sort of things. But if you look at all the prophecies in the Bible related to Jesus' first coming and when they were fulfilled, some of them were fulfilled early on, some of them fulfilled a little bit before Jesus was actually born, but about 60%, 59% actually, of the prophecies related to Jesus' first coming were fulfilled in the last week. So from the time of his triumphal entry on Palm Sunday until his crucifixion and then death, burial, and resurrection. And then, of course, 40 days later, his ascension. But those prophecies were fulfilled, roughly 60% of them, in a very short period of time. So if pattern is prophecy, and it is, you can see it over and over in Scripture, we would expect that with the prophecies related to his second coming, that there will be a compression of those prophecies being fulfilled in a very short period of time. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to be in process. So I've kind of come up with a grid that I use to kind of analyze news and events in the light of Bible prophecy, and I call it my ACLU grid. Acceleration is the A, convergence is the C, logistics is the L, and understanding is the U. Let me start with the U first, understanding. Daniel in Daniel chapter 12, and again in Daniel chapter 11, he talks about the fact that in the end times, knowledge will increase. And I believe that that kind of has a double meaning. It means general knowledge. And we can see that with the explosion of electronic information. Again, I was a trial lawyer, and I used to work on a case for years, and I would write 30 letters. A couple of years ago, we had to produce all of our communications in connection with the case. And as we dug through it, in less than a year, my clients and I had communicated over 4,000 times about this one particular matter. So you can see there's an explosion in information in that period of time. So that's one of the meanings of Daniel chapter 12, verse 3 and 4. But then Daniel in verses 8 and 9, he wants to know, when is this stuff that I've been writing about that you've given me, some from an angel, some from dreams and that type of thing, when is this going to be? And he was told, Daniel, don't worry about it. Seal up the book until the time of the end. And at the time of the end, the wicked will never understand what's going on, but the wise will understand. And in Daniel 11, it says the wise will understand and instruct many. So I think we really want to be the people who can be wise and instruct many. So that's the U part, understanding, ACLU, understanding. There's also a logistics part. There's these Bible prophecies, things have to be put in place. So use the example. There's been a lot of discussion over the last a couple of years with things related to a certain illness that I refer to so I can get around the YouTube censors. I call it Charlie Vector 019er. With regard to that, a lot of people say, well, this is the mark of the beast. The treatment for Charlie Vector 019er is the mark of the beast. Now, I don't think that, mainly because the Antichrist hasn't revealed himself yet. The false prophet isn't around. But what we will know is that when this mark of the beast thing is implemented, you can read about that in Revelation 13, it's not going to be... Jesus gives us a time marker. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, that's Matthew chapter 24, verse 15. When you see that, flee. Now, so we know that the mark of the beast comes after that particular event, but it's not like they're going to have that event and then the Antichrist and false prophet are going to sit around and have a conversation and say, hey, we need to implement this. It wouldn't be nice if we had something to control humanity. I think that a friend of mine who writes on an area called transhumanism and technocracy, which are very big items, and if you want to read a good book on it, The Evil Twins of Technocracy and Transhumanism by Patrick Wood. And Patrick made a good comment a couple months ago on a podcast that I was listening to, and he said, listen, when this mark of the beast comes into play, it's not going to happen. It's like I said, it's not going to be the Antichrist and false prophets sitting around like, okay, now what could we do to control humanity and get them to worship the Antichrist? It's not going to come about that way. It's going to be all in place. All of the technology, all of the logistics are going to be in place, and they're just going to need to flip the switch. So that would be the ACLU, acceleration, convergence, logistics. The things are going to be in place and ready to be fulfilled, and then understanding, and people are going to understand what they are. And then the acceleration and convergence I already talked about is they're going to be happening very close together, and they're going to be converging. All of these different, what I liken to lines of Bible prophecy. they sort of converge at the second coming of Jesus Christ. But as you get close, it's almost like the vortex of a tornado. On the outer reaches of a tornado or a hurricane, I think I saw a big hurricane hit Acapulco today. And they said it was a lot more powerful than they thought it was going to be. But on the outer bands of a hurricane, you have disruption. But as you get closer and closer to the eye, and then when you get to the eye, there's a lot of disruption. So I think that's how when the convergence of all these different lines of Bible prophecy happen, it creates almost like a tornado vortex. And if you've ever seen a tornado, it's it can cause a lot of damage in the vortex part of the tornado. So that's sort of a background. Now so one of the critical things though is I would call myself a Christian Zionist. I believe that Israel is central to Bible prophecy. I read the prophecies. For example, the passage in Matthew that I just talked about, Jesus talks about when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. So we know what Daniel writes elsewhere in Daniel 11 about the abomination of desolation. And we know that there was often Bible prophecy also will have a multiple fulfillment. It'll be fulfilled once, twice, maybe more. So there was an abomination of desolation that took place after Daniel and before Jesus arrived, but it's not the final one. It's sort of prefigures. It's like a picture of coming attractions. This is, and so this can be kind of, it's going to come about, like I said, quickly, gradually, then suddenly is how these things are all going to come about. And the abomination, I forgot my train of thought here. I'm an old man now, so I'm inclined to kind of lose my mind at times or lose my place. When Jesus talks about the abomination of desolation, he also couples that with instruction in Matthew 24, verses 21, 22, that says, when you see the abomination of desolation, and it says, then flee. Pray that you won't be doing this you having to flee on the Sabbath, on Shabbat. Pray that your flight won't be in winter and that type of thing. But that prophecy really only makes sense if a government is in control of Israel and Jerusalem at that time that recognizes Shabbat. And if you've ever been to Israel, and I've been there a number of times, you can't find a bus in Jerusalem on Shabbat. Everything is shut down. There are Orthodox neighborhoods where they put up barricades. And if you drive around those barricades in your car, the ultra-Orthodox Jews will come out and throw rocks, and I mean big rocks at your car. They will stone your car because you're violating Shabbat. So the prophecy that pray that your flight not be on the Sabbath, on Shabbat, only makes sense if there's a country in place controlling Jerusalem at the time that this takes place, and that can only be a Jewish state of Israel. There are other prophecies in Ezekiel 36, for example. It says, I sent you out, you profaned my name, you Jewish people, and so I dispersed you among the nations. And even when I dispersed you, I'm paraphrasing a long chapter in Ezekiel chapter 36, when you were sent out into the nations, even then you profaned my name, you blasphemed my name. But I'm going to bring you back to your land. I'm going to bring you back to your land, not because you deserve it, but because my holy name is at stake. And I'm going to bring you back. And after I bring you back, then I will give you a new heart so that you will know that I am the Lord. And that's when there's this large conversion of the Jewish people and others on the earth at that time to faith in the Messiah, in Jesus Christ. So that's just the way that works. And it doesn't make sense if there's not a Jewish state of Israel. There's other passages in Ezekiel 35. It talks about a restoration of the land, that the land will be restored. Well, it doesn't really make any sense unless the land is restored. And we have recent history to show that the land has been and is being restored under the Jewish state. A very famous book by Mark Twain called Innocents Abroad. And in Innocents Abroad, Mark Twain did a diary of his travels, including a visit to what is now the nation of Israel. And as he went up and down through the land, traveled through the land, he said, there's nobody here. It's empty. It's devoid of people. It's desolate. It's awful. You can look for pictures of the founding of Tel Aviv in 1909, 114 years ago. It was sand dunes and swamps. Now it's this vibrant city full of, huge, tall skyscrapers, looks like a miniature New York City. And that's happened in this time. And there has been a restoration of land. I've heard that there's over 1 billion trees have been planted in Israel since the Jewish people started coming back. And you can see it. I mean, you can look at a satellite map, and on that satellite map, you'll see the Negev. Well, there's a line in the Negev, and it's brown on one side and sort of green on the other. It's green on the Israel side. It's brown on the Egyptian side. And that's a good picture of how these things are going to happen. So I believe that the nation of Israel is really central and core. And without the nation of Israel, a lot of the prophecies don't make any sense. There are prophecies that there'll be a restoration of a rebuilding of the temple. I mean, the abomination of desolation. And then Paul talks about it in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. When you see, he will go into the holy place and declare himself above all that is called God. 2 Timothy 3:4. The man of sin, the son of perdition, the Antichrist. You really need to have a temple. And you're not going to have a temple without a Jewish state being in place. And even now when you have a Jewish state, everybody wonders, how are you going to get a temple? So let me make a suggestion. So in this current war between Israel and I'll call them Palestinians. I don't like that name. The Palestinian name really never got attached to the Arabs until the KGB came up with the Palestine Liberation Organization in 1963 or 64 as a way to kind of keep conflict going between communist Russia and the West. Now, before that, they called people who lived there Palestinians, but they were Palestinian Jews. The newspaper in Jerusalem was called the Palestine Post. It's now called the Jerusalem Post. But but it requires a Jewish state to be in place for these prophecies to be fulfilled. So in the current environment, if you remember last week, so one of the things that, with regard to what's going on with Gaza and Israel right now, is we're in the midst of a massive propaganda war. The Palestinians, and I don't like the term, but I'll call them Palestinians because that's what everybody calls them, the Palestinian Arabs in Gaza, they are masters of propaganda. So the other night, the news, I monitor this news, and I have an app that shows me all the rocket strikes and that type of thing. And for 3 weeks now, it's been buzzing all the time. A little bit less the last couple of days, but they're still firing rockets in there. But so the news, all of a sudden, everything started hitting my news. Israeli airstrike kills 500 at hospital in Gaza. Now, Israel didn't respond for an hour, but the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, the BBC, everybody's saying Israeli airstrike killed hundreds. But when they started to unpack that, about the rockets that are fired from Gaza into Israel, they're crude in many cases. The Hamas, which is the governing authority in Gaza, has better rockets than one of the other terror groups known as the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. It appears but the rockets, between 10 to 30% of the rockets that are fired to Israel never get out of Israel. I met a Palestinian doctor a number of years ago. He was a featured speaker at a pro-Palestinian conference that I went to just because I like to know what the enemy is thinking. And I actually happened to he sat down next to me at dinner. And I asked him, because one of the reasons he was there to speak was to relay his story. And about, I'm thinking 15, 16 years ago, in a rocket strike in Gaza, 3 of his daughters and a niece were killed. Now, we don't know that it was a Israeli rocket. It could have been a Palestinian rocket falling short. But I'm not diminishing this man's loss of 3 daughters and a niece. I mean, it's a horrible thing to go through. I'm very sympathetic to that. We don't like innocent lives being lost, but this happens in warfare. But it could have been a Palestinian rocket that fell short. But as I unpacked it and looked at the satellite images, and what happened was the rocket hit in a parking lot. There's no way that it caught cars on fire. And there might have been 10 or 50 people in there that might have been killed and injured. But they were talking about having to bury them out from under rubble, but there's no rubble. The hospital's still standing. The windows are still in place. So it's misinformation that's coming. And it took Israel. They wanted to be careful, and they pulled out the map, the videos, and that type of thing. And they could not determine. They said it's not our rocket. It's a rocket that they fired, and it fell short. So everybody had to retract it. And even the New York Times came out and said, and I do subscribe to the New York Times just because I think it's an important paper. And again, you always like to know what the enemy's thinking. But even the New York Times came out and said, there's so much misinformation out here. It's very, very difficult to figure out what's going on. So understand that we're in the midst of this massive information war. Now, the next thing I probably should talk about, what's going on there and what's going to happen. So what's happened so far is that about 1,800 Israelis have been confirmed dead and identified, between 1,700 and 1,800. And they still have at least 100 bodies to go to try to identify. So I don't think that the dead number includes those who have not been identified. And it's very difficult to identify these bodies. They came in, they had the international press come in, and they played videos that they had discovered the guys that were doing this terror attack on October 7th. They had GoPro cameras, cell phone cameras, and they were taking videos of what they did. And they also, like, for example, there's a picture of a guy driving his car, and he has his dash cam. He's a Jewish guy. And they came across the fence. About 2,000 trained fighters and another, probably double that, just regular citizens came across. And they just went on a killing spree along the area there close to Gaza. And I was down there in December. I went to the Christian Media Summit in Israel. And they took us down. They took us down to the army base down in that area near the Negev in Gaza. And at that army base, by the way, they have, and I'll talk about this in just a moment, they have a thing called the Urban Warfare Training Center, which they have built a mock-up of Gaza City. By the way, the Palestinians copied that to a fashion. They actually built a mock-up of Jewish communities to train the terrorists about how they would go through and systematically kill people. But so people were trying to flee, and a guy fleeing, he's got his dash cam, and he's driving down the road, and he sees a soldier, and he slows down, but it's a Palestinian guy. The Palestinians went into some bases along the border, killed the soldiers. They killed about 300 of them over the course of that couple days that they were at large in the area. They stole Israeli Defense Force uniforms and wore them. And then they would go to a house and say, hey, they would speak Hebrew. They trained themselves to speak Hebrew. We're the IDF here. We're here to help. Could you open up and let us in? It became a very difficult decision for the people. Is this friend or foe? They have Israeli uniforms. So they had these guys on the road, and they slaughtered 300 people in their cars on the road. In many cases, they set the house on fire. They threw grenades into the people's safe room. Everybody has recent constructed homes, especially in Israel, have safe rooms. So when they get the warning, they run to their safe room because it's reinforced. It has a door. It's to protect them against a chemical attack. Well, the terrorists all knew this. They've been doing these attacks for years, and they've been watching how people respond. And in many cases, they were employees, people employed from Gaza who came into Israel to work, sometimes 18 to 22,000. There's a video I played in my update last Sunday where the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, was bragging at a ostensibly Jewish group, but it's really an anti-Israel group called J Street in Washington, D.C., about how what I call the Biden administration, because I don't think Biden's running the show, that's just my personal opinion, how the Biden administration had helped get Gazans to work in Israel by, I don't know, helping fund the work permits or pushing Israel to give them work permits. Well, now it turns out that that's a braggadocio of Tony Blinken, our what he would say esteemed Secretary of State. I would not use that term to describe that man, who's, by the way, Jewish. That's not aged very well, because what happened was a lot of the terrorists were people who had worked in Israel, and they were doing intel surveys of the kibbutzes and communities where they were working, so they knew where everything was. And in most of the kibbutzes, it's a collective sort of left-wing communist type thing, and a lot of peace activists live down there. They have a central armory. They don't have their own personal weapons. And so now that whole thing is being completely changed. Thinking on that's being changed in Israel as we speak. They're telling everybody, go get a gun. And so what they did that was just horrific. They bound people together, set them on fire, and you could tell, and the medical examiners have just been pray for them, because it's post-traumatic stress disorder that they're going to be suffering from, having to examine these bodies. Like there was one, it was just like a big burnt pile, and they put it through a CAT scan, and what they found was two people, older person and a younger person, in an embrace, hugging each other as they were burned to death, bound together with wire. And the only way that they could tell that it was two people was the CAT scan revealed two spinal columns, one of an adult, one of a younger person. The women, in many cases, they were raped before they were killed. The rapes were so brutal that the autopsies have revealed that many of the women had broken pelvises from the rapes. There were many people beheaded. There's been a lot of controversy about that. And so now the misinformation war is Israel is releasing this stuff now to get over the thing, oh, that's all fake, it never happened, it wasn't that bad. Now everybody's saying, oh, well, you're just making that up. That's computer-generated graphics. So we're in the midst of a massive information war. Now, where's the war going? This is just with regard to Gaza. There's a lot of other pieces at play. So the United States government, Joe Biden, went to Israel in an active war zone. Israel had declared war on Gaza, and he went there. And there's a lot of question about, is Joe Biden coming as the friend of Israel, or is he coming to offer Israel enticements like more Iron Dome missiles, or as a way in bringing the Gerald Ford in, bringing aircraft carrier group, bringing the Dwight Eisenhower aircraft group in. And I hear there's another aircraft group that's on its way to the Middle East now. And giving them, Iron Dome, and giving them some money. But it's not as generous as the Biden administration makes it out to be. And it has to get, I think the aid package has to get passed through Congress. And until today, nothing's getting through Congress. And now we don't know what's getting through Congress. But the numbers of what they've offered Israel are not what the government says, like 40 billion, but it's not really 40 billion. It's a lot. It's a bunch of pork and other stuff thrown in there, just like they do in bills in D.C. all the time. So the question is Israel helping? Or is the United States helping Israel? In some respects, we are, but some people think there's a person I would highly recommend that you follow. She does a podcast at JNS. J, the letter N is in Nancy, and S is in Sam. JNS channel on YouTube. Her name is Caroline Glick. She is a very passionate, she was born in Chicago. She was actually raised in Hyde Park, the neighborhood where Obama got his political start. She's in her early 50s. She made Aliyah when she was about 22 to Israel. She was the official spokesperson for the Israeli Defense Force. She actually worked on the negotiating team for the Oslo Accords. She served Netanyahu for a while as I think a IDF liaison or something like that. She's been a journalist for many years. She's very passionate, very good, very clear, very direct. And I follow Caroline for years and years. I would highly recommend that you watch her. And so today she did a podcast and she was talking about how the world's turned against Israel. The Secretary General of the UN came out and he said that Israel is there's I'm trying to think the way he said it. He did a talk yesterday at the UN Security Council, and the reaction of the Israeli ambassador to the UN was just he really went after the Secretary General. And many people in the Israeli government have come out and said that the Secretary General should resign. He essentially said, well, yeah, what Hamas did was bad, but you have to understand it happened in the context of them being oppressed by Israel for 56 years. And it's just nonsense. They've been oppressed for a while because they don't act the right way. They do these rocket attacks, they do terrorist attacks, and on this occasion they did now there probably was some negligence on the part of IDF people, but they did a masterfully designed operation. There's another YouTube channel called The Turning Point with Michael Doran and Gadi Taub. Gadi Taub used to be a left-wing professor, journalist, and now he's completely conservative. And you can find that channel on Rumble. And they talked about what they did in this attack was they used unsophisticated technology to conduct sophisticated technological operations against the IDF on what many thought was the most secure border in the world. They got a drone. They got like a quadcopter. It's a drone with 4 propellers on it. They attached an RPG to that. Then they flew that over like a tank. And they've learned this from watching what the Ukrainians have done. The Ukrainians have used technology to kind of keep Russia at bay. I don't think things have gone as well for Russia as Russia would like. But they take this RPG, they put it on this drone quadcopter that you can go buy at Walmart or Best Buy or someplace like that. And then they fly it over the top of the tank and they drop this, 2 to 5 pound RPG on the tank and kill everybody in the tank and destroy the tank. Because tanks were designed for mobile combat. So they're protected on the sides, back, and front, but not on the top. The top is vulnerable. But when the tanks were designed and built, nobody was thinking drones could drop a relatively inexpensive RPG on top of the tank and destroy the tank and kill everybody in it. And this has been happening in Ukraine for the last year and a half. Now, Hamas did this in a place where they're really restricted. But Hamas was elected. There was an election. What Israel decided back in 2003, Hamas came about, by the way, in 1983, 84. And their charter calls for the elimination of Israel. And so everybody complained about that, and they updated the charter in, I think, 2016, and the charter still says Israel shouldn't exist. When you see these protests, by the way, you see the protests, the people are running around saying, from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. That's not like, oh, we want a Palestinian state and coexist with Israel. That means from the river, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, we want Palestine, no Israel. They want Israel to be eradicated. That is their modus operandi. That's everything that they exist. And they hate the Jews. One of the guys, some of the things they did was really cruel in this attack. For example, one lady, they took her cell phone and filmed the terrorists killing her. They then took the phone and uploaded it to the woman's Facebook or Telegram account, and her granddaughter got on and saw the video of her grandmother being killed and tortured. There's another guy, he called his parents on the cell phone of a person that he had killed, saying, I'm killing Jews. And the parents were going, oh, you shouldn't do that. No, they were saying, oh, God be with you, Allah Akbar. What they did was cruel. There was a place in one kibbutz of about 750 people. They found about 250 bodies, and 47 of them were toddlers and babies, a number of whom had been beheaded, and many of whom had been burned. So you see these dump trucks with burned, just full of charred bodies. You see refrigerated semi-trailers full of body bags, including little tiny body bags for babies. There's a picture circulating out there of a kindergarten class of about 12 kids in kindergarten at a kibbutz. Every one of those kids has been killed or kidnapped and taken to Gaza. They were given a bounty, and so they have about 220 hostages in Gaza. They've released 4 of them so far. They released an 85-year-old lady yesterday. She was a peace activist. She lived in a kibbutz down in the southern part of Israel near Gaza. Her husband, I think she's 85, he's 83. I think they're children of Holocaust survivors. He's still being held hostage in Gaza. They have whole families that they took. They had whole families that they killed. It was I don't know that ISIS on its worst day, the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, was any more cruel than, it certainly was not any more cruel than what Hamas was when they went into Israel. So now the question is, what are they going to do? Netanyahu has said we need to go in and get rid of Hamas. That's going to be a difficult operation. They have about 300 miles of tunnels under Gaza. It's about 25 miles from north to south, and it ranges from about 3.5 to 7.5 miles wide. It's not a big place, but it has a couple million people, a lot of buildings, very densely populated. And having been through a mock-up of Gaza City, can tell you that if the ground is not prepared adequately ahead of time, Israel could sustain literally thousands of casualties in the ground invasion of Gaza. Now, Netanyahu announced not too long ago that they're ready to go, and when they give the word, the ground invasion will commence. There's now there's speculation in different places. I think there's here's the thing that they're saying, well, maybe they'll put some kind of poison gas or nerve gas through the tunnels to get rid of the terrorists. But then, the risk is they're going to kill the hostages when they do that. So I think you'll see tactics similar to what the U.S. used in Fallujah and Mosul to get rid of ISIS. Fallujah, I think we lost over 1,000 men. Israel, I think, nobody will say, but I think Israel's expecting that to happen. So that's the southern theater. But now everybody's saying Iran helps fund Hamas. It's also funded by a country called Qatar, Qatar, which is a Muslim Brotherhood supporting terrorist state. That's where the World Cup soccer was last year, and they bribed everybody on the planet to get the thing there. And it's a big scandal. And by the way, yesterday, there on the front page of the main newspaper in Qatar was a picture of a guy named Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, meeting with the foreign minister in Qatar, in Doha, to talk about how we can work together. Qatar is a terrorist-sponsoring state. They're playing both sides of it. They're trying to look like they're the good guy by getting people out, but they also are the publisher of a website and news channel called Al Jazeera, which is just pretty much pure propaganda. I mean, it makes the New York Times look like, I don't know, the Christian Post or something like that. It's pretty bad. So it's been a problem. And what happened was, so there's a Rumble channel for Alex Newman, a guy named Alex Newman called Liberty Sentinel. And I was on the show earlier today. And before me on the show, he had two guests. He had myself, and he also had a guy named Mordecai Kadar. And Mordecai Kadar, frankly, I wish he'd just let me listen. And Mordecai Kadar, in my view, he's certainly the leading Jewish expert on Islam and Arab culture in Israel. And he's probably certainly easily within the top 3 in the world. He's a couple of years older than I am. I almost met him when I was in Israel, but I was actually standing next to him for about 20 minutes talking to somebody else, and I turned around and started talking to who he'd been talking to, but he had left to go home. So, but he's brilliant on Islam and what Islam really believes and how Arab culture is very tribal in the way that it's organized. But what's happened over the years is that the Palestinian Authority gets money. They get money from us. They get money from the EU. They get money from the United Nations. Hamas gets money from us. They get money from Israel. They get money from, all these different organizations. What the Palestinian Authority has done, which is internally is an enemy of Hamas, they don't get along. They pay people that have killed Jews in terrorist attacks, and they're put in prison, and they pay them a monthly sum. It goes to their families. And it's more money than a family could go out and earn working as a doctor or an engineer. They get more money by killing Jews. So when you go to a city like Nablus, which is one of the terror hotbeds, they have a refugee camp there for Palestinians that's been there since 1948. It's been there for 75 years. It's not a nice place. It's densely populated. It's squalor. But then one block away are these nice apartment buildings that people live in. And I've asked people, the Palestinian people, I'm like, what's going on with this? Why do you allow this to happen? And they say, oh, well, this is because of the Israeli occupation of us. And it doesn't make any sense. It's complete. And by the way, they have refugee camps in Jordan. They have refugee camps in Syria. And I can show you pictures, for example, of the Yarmouk refugee camp. You've seen the pictures, I'm sure, of the destruction in Gaza. I can show you pictures of the Yarmouk Palestinian refugee camp in Damascus, within the city limits of Damascus, that looks like Gaza after Israel's been bombing it over the last few weeks. Do you see anybody out there protesting about the bombing that Syria did to this refugee camp with the assistance of Russia? Do you ever see a protest about that? No, but Israel does it. So there's this pay-for-slay program, and then there's the propaganda machine. Everything that Israel does is wrong, even though other people are done. So, for example, you have Vladimir Putin the other day pronouncing, oh, it's terrible what Israel's doing in Gaza. Boy, they're killing innocent people, like he hasn't been doing the same thing for the last year and a half in Ukraine. If I've said this looking at the hypocrisy that goes on, if hypocrisy was water, the world would drown like Noah's flood, because it's all over the place. So there's a lot going on with Gaza. There may be an invasion. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to take weeks to months. The people that live in the area around the Gaza border, they've been evacuated up to the north into Tel Aviv and other communities in Jerusalem. Probably 30,000 people. They've been told you're not going to come home for at least 3 months because it's a war zone. But at the same time, Hezbollah, which effectively controls the government in Lebanon, is making threats. They're funded by Iran. They're Iranian proxy. They meet with the Lebanese or the Iranian foreign minister and other high-ranking people in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps on a regular basis, planning operations against Israel. And the fear was, I think everybody thought they had Gaza under control, and they got complacent. And then they made a very clever operation, and coupled with some negligence, I think, on the part of Israelis, they were able to come in and kill and slaughter a lot of people. There's still a couple of these guys running around at large. They haven't caught all of them yet. At least that's what I heard yesterday. It's going to be... So there's potential that war could break out in the north. And there's tunnels in the north that come across the border. And the plan of Hezbollah along has been is they would flood across the border in these tunnels. They would go into communities and kidnap people. To prevent that from happening, most of the north has been evacuated. About 120,000 people now that lived in the northern part of Israel near the Lebanon border have moved south. This is incredibly disruptive. These people may not be going back for 2 years, depending on how long this operation takes. So Iran wants to get involved. Russia's threatened if the U.S. gets involved, we're going to get involved. And it looks very bleak in some respects for Israel right now. And we know that this is a condition that's going to exist when we get into the prophecies of Ezekiel 38 and 39. They win because God intervenes. And I don't think we're there yet on the logistics part, but I'm just saying all of that stuff is being set up for fulfillment. Now, Emmett sent me a question about touching on Turkey. We know from the prophecies of Ezekiel 38 and 39 that there's a coalition of countries that comes from the north. And it's a controversial subject in Bible prophecy. Everybody's got a different view. So I sort of take an open-minded view, like I have baskets. So I've like Russia's part of it, basket, and Russia's not part of it, basket. I tend to think Russia's part of it, but I also think Turkey is a major part of it, including what I call the Stan Islamic republics in Central Asia. And Erdogan was recently, it was announced he's coming to Israel for a meeting. Well, let me put this in context. Friday, it'll be 4 weeks since Benjamin Netanyahu went to the UN General Assembly and stood at the podium there and said, he started off with a very interesting part of his speech. He said, Israel, when Moses was getting ready to die and we were going into the promised land, he called us together and he gave us the blessings and the curses. The blessings we would get if we followed what God told us to do, and the curses if we did not. And he said, now we're on the verge of a giant blessing, a peace agreement with Saudi Arabia. And this peace agreement, and even Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, said, this will be a peace agreement unlike anything since the end of World War II. It will be historic. And Netanyahu said, we're in the blessings and curses phase. We have the curse with Iran trying to destroy us, but we have the blessing, and we are on the verge of a new Middle East. Little did he know that 2 weeks later, for lack of a better term, all hell would break loose in Gaza. So now the concern is that that same thing could happen up north. Israel has about 100,000 troops around Gaza. They have about 100,000 troops up around Lebanon to deal with the Hezbollah thing. A number of years ago, I played a video at a intelligence conference, security conference, where the head of the Israeli Air Force, can't remember his name at the time, gave a speech. And in the speech he said, listen, we had a war with Lebanon in 2006. It lasted 37 days. I just want you to know, Lebanon, that if we go to war with you, we will do in 24 to 72 hours what it took us 37 days to do in 2006. It will be shock and awe like you've never seen. So, and understand that as Israel defends itself, the world opinion is going to turn against Israel. This is prophetic. We know that in the end, in Zechariah 14, it says, all nations will be gathered together against Israel. In Joel chapter 3, it says, one of the judgments, the nations of the world are gathered in judgment at the end in the valley of Jehoshaphat there around Jerusalem. Because why? Because they tried to divide my land. So when you see these peace agreements and they're dividing the land, understand that this is fitting into Bible prophecy perfectly. And ultimately, it will result in judgment for everybody. So Turkey is part of this, back to Ezekiel 38 and 39. Turkey, Togarmah, Meshach, Gomer, this is part of modern day Turkey. And Erdogan is very much, he's acting like he's pro-Israel until this happened. And he's come out, he gave a speech right the day after the October 7th when this invasion occurred from Gaza, and said, we got to respect the Palestinian people. He gave another speech yesterday talking about supporting the Palestinian people and that Hamas is not a terror organization, it's a liberation organization. So the propaganda that Erdogan to get people in Turkey who are in many respects anti-Semitic, they hate Jews because of Islam, and Erdogan is a radical Islamist. He's memorized the Quran. He was noted as a young man for standing up on the bow of a ferry across the Bosporus in Istanbul and reciting the Quran. And you find videos of him going and dedicating the mosque in London a few years ago, reciting the Quran. It's very creepy, but he's an Islamist. And he came out today and said, Hamas is not a terrorist organization, we stand. When Trump, if you remember back in December of 2017, then President Trump announced he's going to move the embassy the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which makes sense. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. It's where the Knesset is. It's where the government offices are. But everybody had their embassies in Tel Aviv, but the U.S. was the first to move it. And it was a big deal. And what Erdogan did in the newspapers that he uses to publish his propaganda, he published a map showing all Islamic nations coming against Israel and trying to defeat it. So, and he's very big on reconstituting the Ottoman Empire and also the influence of these Turkmen republics, what I call the Stan republics in Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan. I suppose you could include Afghanistan and Pakistan, and I call them the Stan republics. But they're Islamic, and in many respects, they're ethnic Turks. So there's a affinity there, and it appears that they're part of this coalition that comes against Israel at some point in the end. And we don't know exactly when this is going to happen, but certainly the geopolitical lines are being moved for all the nations to come against Israel. But it's interesting, Saudi Arabia was on track for a peace agreement. They've moved back from that. Now, that's what they've done. I think Mohammed bin Salman, when he becomes king, things are going to change. His father's is 87, I think, has dementia, not in good health. And Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, is effectively the ruler of Saudi Arabia, but there's certain things because of the Arab tribal culture that he will not do until his father passes away, which would be do something with regard to Israel. And he seems to be backing off the Palestinian people. They've said that the peace agreement with Israel is completely dead right now. But very interestingly enough, the Houthis, which is an enemy of Saudi Arabia in Yemen to the south, they've been at war for years. The Houthis have launched attacks into Saudi Arabia. The Houthis have launched drone and missile attacks against the United Arab Emirates, which is about the same distance from Yemen to the United Arab Emirates, Dubai, that big fancy city with the tallest building in the world. That's about the same distance from Yemen as Israel is. Well, the other night there were about 14 drones and missiles that were launched from Yemen to go to Israel. U.S. destroyers knocked all of them down except one. There were some reports that the Saudis had fired their Iron Dome missile defense and took out one of the missiles. Nobody really ever confirmed that until today. And that's very interesting that the Saudis shot down something that had been launched against Israel. The Houthis are very tight with Iran. So this was an Iranian missile or drone, and the Saudis shot it down. And that's kind of a significant thing. I kind of think that if Israel is successful in Gaza and with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and I think they will be ultimately, but it'll be very difficult. There could be tens of thousands of Israelis dead in these operations. It's very difficult, close-in fighting. So the world's really, in Russia's threatening, they're going to get involved, and now everybody in the U.S. is moving carriers and weapons, and I don't know, 30,000 troops have now been sent to the Middle East. Iraq is kind of doing things against military bases that we have in eastern Syria. The world's really on the verge of a nuclear war, or World War III. And I think that I would just encourage you to kind of think about that, prepare yourself spiritually. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not a prophet. I can only tell you what I'm seeing geopolitically in light of Bible prophecy in the scriptures. And I think we're entering a very disruptive time of turmoil. That's not to say all the cultural stuff that's going on. That's not to say all the economic stuff that's going on. The treasury market for U.S. treasuries is really in a state of meltdown. And I don't know what's going to happen to the economy. Nothing that I see looks encouraging or good, unless you're investing on the downside of the market, which people do all the time and make a lot of money. But it's going to be a very difficult time. So I think, Emmett, that's about, I guess I've gone about an hour, which is not hard for me, but, so I don't know if anybody has anything specific that they want to ask, or if we just want to wrap it up. Okay, yeah, please close in prayer, folks. And thanks so much for listening. Again, if you want to follow us, Real FBC on Rumble, Fellowship Bible Chapel on YouTube, and you can also type my name into YouTube and Rumble, because there's other conferences and things that I've spoken at that have put up videos that I've done, and appreciate you. Okay, and then look for Liberty Sentinel on Rumble. I did get about 4 minutes to speak today on some of these issues, but really listen to it for Dr. Mordecai Kadar, because he's a treasure to the world with his knowledge.